Unmuted.
Martinez and Bond. Can you hear us, Mr. Martinez, Mr. Bond?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, Chair.
Perfect, thank you. All right, welcome everybody. This is the next food for thought conversation for our community. I've tried to establish a series of meetings to talk about what's good in our town because it's so easy to get stuck into all the problems. So today is that meeting, and it's Friday, April 19th, it's 11:31 a.m. We'll go ahead and do introductions. Mr. Johnson.
Zach Johnson.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Anna Brawley.
Christopher Constant, and on the phone, Mr. Bond.
Here.
Mr. Martinez.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
All right, awesome. And then with us, we have a panel of presenters from the United Way, from the Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness, from Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, and a small project called In Our Backyard. The framing of today's conversation is that we're going to invite each of the presenters 10 minutes to present to us, with generally reserving questions from the presenters so we can get all of the presentations on the table, and then we'll have a roundtable conversation about all the things that people want to ask questions about. That way everybody gets some good time to talk about the projects they're working on, and we have a way to organize the conversation. So thank you everybody for coming. As I mentioned, this is our food for thought session. What I like to call What's Good Anchorage. This is a series of lunchtime work sessions focused on positive actions in our community so that we can take a break from the day-to-day work of fixing everything that seems to be broken all the time, or things that are going wrong, and to celebrate the great things that are happening right now. Today's conversation is centered around housing success stories. Housing is really our number one priority. It has been for a couple of years. And again, it's easy to feel like we're not making progress, but now is the time to hear from the community. We're joined by 4 community organizations that have developed programs to house some of our most vulnerable neighbors. Thank you to the United Way of Anchorage, Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, and In Our Backyard for being here today to share your work with us. So here's how the conversation will run. You'll have the brief presentations. They'll share a little bit about themselves and the work they do. We'll hold the questions, and then once we're done, we'll open it up. And so first, I'd like to invite Sam Longacre from United Way to talk about their Home for Good program, their eviction diversion program, and their landlord housing partnership. Sam, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm Sam Longacre. I'm the housing director at United Way. I don't know who's doing slides. Oh, the next one. Thanks. I was like, nobody looks like they're clicking a button. Next slide, please. So I'll do our eviction diversion program first. Next slide. So this is a partnership with the Alaska court system. They have the eviction diversion program for the whole state that started in March 2023. This project offers free mediation to landlords and tenants. There could be many reasons why a landlord and tenant are in mediation, but if the main issue is that there is past due rent that the tenant can't catch up on, United Way can step in when the tenant can pay rent going forward, but just needs the rental assistance for the past due rent. This is a really cool way that we can step in for prevention. And we have done 74 payments. So we've prevented 74 evictions for past due rent from March of last year through March of this year. Next slide, please. And then we have our landlord housing partnership. This project has 3 main pieces that are designed to really help landlords come in as stakeholders. In this project, we have a web-based platform that is specific for case managers and landlords. So landlords have already talked with staff about the different types of programs for people exiting homelessness, and they can get a little more specific. They know people are coming in with applications through this platform with housing case management services. And then we pay landlord incentives at lease signing, and then another retention incentive to help start that conversation and incentivize the landlord to reconsider applications they may have previously screened out. And then we hold the risk mitigation fund pool to help pay landlords for damages caused by tenants that were over the security deposit. And so in our landlord housing partnership, we have helped 117 households move in through those landlord incentives. Next, please. Then we have Home for Good. Home for Good is our Pay for Success program that started with philanthropic funding and then receives payment from the municipality only when outcomes are achieved. So this one gets paid on results from an evaluation that happens every 6 months. Next, please. And so in this project, we earn outcome payments based on a housing stability metric, but we also measure reduction in emergency service use. And so the bar graph with the colors is showing reduction in emergency service use pre and post lease. So when someone's lease start date was. And this one, we're really excited. We keep seeing these big reductions in every single evaluation we have. So we're really excited about how that's been consistently positive. Next slide, please. So in Home for Good, we have 96 participants housed as of the end of March. One thing we're really excited about in Home for Good is that we've been able to partner with those hotel to apartment conversions and have a block of units at both the guest house and the Barrett. And there's one cohort that we had recently that moved in when the guest house started as apartments. And that was a cohort that at the 6-month mark had the highest housing stability rate that we had ever had in the project. So we're super excited about that. And we're hoping that we see similar results at the Barrett, where we've gotten a little bit of efficiency of scale for staff. A lot of people will say that they have a little more of a community feel having multiple people that they know or are familiar with in the same space. And then we've been able to add some on-site tenancy support at those sites because we have multiple people in one location. And next slide, please. The challenges we have in Home for Good are, and in many other housing projects up here, are housing vouchers. The wait times are really long and the process is difficult to navigate. And then availability of units is always a challenge. And then staffing, like in many other sectors, is difficult when service providers are short-staffed. Then we have a really hard time making new referrals. So those are our kind of 3 limiting factors that will come up often in Home for Good. And next slide. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sure there will be some questions when we come back around. So next, we have Jessica Parks and Meg Zalatil who are going to brief us on the efforts of the Anchorage Coalition to end homelessness. Jessica.
Well, it's going to be me. So good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be sharing this table with our partners. Our project, The Next Step, doesn't work in isolation or in a silo. Actually, we've had the opportunity to work with Home for Good. We work closely with Central Lutheran Church on the development of their program, and we're always bugging AHFC for something. So we have these slides, but first I want to talk to you about our house. Our house is our individuals housed to date through the Next Step program. And we have more people to add to our house. It is a really great milestone for us today. We hit 101 of the 150 this week. And so in here we have Theodore, David, Jakorek, Chris, Larry, Lewis, Brandon, David, Eva, Christopher, Sylvia, Jeremiah, and Julia. So the reason we have done this, particularly in our office, is each one of these is an individual and a person with a story. And the super cool thing about Next Step is how we get from their position of experiencing homelessness to housed is to keep these people centered throughout. And so, yeah, I know I'm supposed to go through the slides, but I think more important is to tell you a quick story. We recently had the opportunity to house the top 2 people on coordinated entry. So those are the 2 most vulnerable people in our community, and they're a couple. They also have a dog. That makes it a little bit challenging. They're also staying at Cuddy Park. So by being at the top of coordinated entry, they got a referral for a permanent supportive housing program. but their needs are just a little bit more than any one program could meet. And so those two individuals and their dog, we got to get some dogs for our house. We were able to come along with the next step and add additional case management and a small amount of rental assistance, even though it's a permanent supportive housing program, because their PFDs count as income, which is really tough. And so they're housed. So the two most vulnerable people in our community, by keeping them centered and talking with program providers, we're able to work together, combine programs, and they're now no longer at Cuddy Park, and they're in housing. So we will put our additional people in the house today. I've gotten a little bit of feedback. It's a little bit chaotic. Pretty soon we're going to definitely have an overcrowding issue, which we'll definitely need to take care of. But for us, this is really important to see the progress represented. So if we want to go through the next slide, a bit of a broken record, but housing is the solution to homelessness. Everyone is ready. Housing first is the key. Next slide. So we committed to house 150 people by the end of emergency cold weather shelter. We provide case management for up to 12 months. That case management is 200 hours for the year. It is the most robust case management offered in our community. And planning for month 13 begins on day 1. And we have great connections to community resources. Next slide. So that's an outdated graphic because we have 101 as of today, but because we don't want to be mean to our director of communications, she updates that once a week. So next slide. So next step by the numbers, case management contracts. We have 2 different case management contracts underway. We have 16 private landlords that we have leased with. We have 16 couples housed. We have purchased 184 pillows, and we have clients with individual resources at 32. So this isn't about just us paying someone's way. It's about leveraging resources that clients already have available to them, whether it's a voucher, an Alaska Mental Health Trust mini grant, income. So it is really about braiding and leveraging even on the individual level. Next slide, please. So the number of people experiencing homelessness in Anchorage, we are seeing a decrease through these efforts. It was 3,569 in October at the beginning of emergency cold weather shelter, and it is 3,289 as the end of February. We always have a little bit of a data lag, so that is our most up-to-date number. And we are seeing an increase in the percentage of exits to permanent housing destinations. Now, this number, 3,289, you heard me talk about it earlier this week. These are people experiencing literal homelessness. They are in shelter, they're in transitional housing, or they're unsheltered. And so far, we've had 2 returns to homelessness. So we have a 98% retention rate at the first quarter. As we've stated previously, we are shooting for an 85% retention rate at 24 months, 12 months after assistance ends. Next slide. So what's next? We continue to recruit landlords. We will be working with the family shelter and the ERA2 funds to decompress and create flow in the family system using the same model. We're preparing for phase 2 this summer. Outside, here we come, and soliciting for continued support for the project. We are out hustling because this project only works when we have the resources for it. Next slide, please. So we are always seeking housing. Please, please, please come and talk with us because this is housing with supports and donations of items for move-in kits. We don't have anyone move into a bare apartment with nothing. We have budgeted everything from being able to provide a bed to essentials, crock pots we provided at the Barrett because those are, there's communal kitchens, but not necessarily in-room cooking facilities, and there's some limitations. Each one of those move-in kits is really tailored to the individual's needs. Next slide. So what isn't on the slides that I think really is worth bringing home and why this is different than some of our other efforts is it's a variety of landlords and a variety of case management with the coalition just matchmaking in between based on a person's needs. What it really does is it decentralizes any one agency to have to carry this alone. And we think that's really important. When you're trying to solve homelessness for 3,289 people, it's going to take everyone. So we believe everyone deserves a safe home that meets their needs and is tailored to their needs. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, next we have Daniel Delfino and Donald Gottschall with Alaska Housing Finance Corporation.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. Just as a manager, I would make props for the visual. When we were in the middle of the pandemic with a rent relief program, we would actually write up on our whiteboard inside the department how many people we were serving each day so the team could have some sort of buy-in. And if we saw 0 2 days in a row, we knew it was a failure. So it's just, we use that internally, and it's a great exercise for everyone to see what's actually happening. If we could go to the first slide, please. So what we're here to talk about is really a partnership that's gone back quite a ways. It started with then Mayor Quinn Davidson, and now with the Bronson administration when the pandemic hit and we started getting hundreds of millions of dollars coming into the state for rent relief. HFC, Cook Inlet, the municipality of Anchorage, and over 10 housing authorities across the state that represent about 150 federally recognized tribes all gathered together to deploy the rent relief money, so there wasn't a lot of duplication in services, and so all of our customers had one platform. It went fairly well in that we were able to deliver help pretty quickly to 26,000 households across the state and help all of our partners fully allocate their money that had a shorter shelf life than the state money that we got in ERA2. But at the end of that, we had touched so many renters. There were about 66,000 people total that benefited from that program through the pandemic. We didn't have a lot of folks that we could serve, and Treasury limited us to 15 months of assistance, regardless of when we delivered service to them. So we moved on to something that we called the stabilization program, which is literally exploiting, not in a bad term, Treasury has actually signed off on this. It's a provision that says you can use rental assistance money to help people obtain and sustain rental housing. So there's nothing in the Code of Federal Regulations that's a 200-page program. It's literally that out of a frequently asked question that underpins all of this. So what we did is we took all of that money that we still had, and we reached out to our partners to try and identify a way to help people who were on the street, that were in a shelter, or in an unsafe environment. And we kept it to just that simple definition. So we wouldn't have, this was a program that we knew had a shelf life that would expire. So we wanted to keep it simple because there wasn't going to be an opportunity to ramp up a lot of institutional memory. And that's what we decided to do. So we launched this program in February of 2022. At the high point, we had 26 of our nonprofit partners, and they were able to leverage the infrastructure that we had with the data retention from the pandemic, deploying all the rent relief money, the framework that we had to get payments to landlords and all the data collection and all of that stuff. The reason why you don't see specific numbers in terms of dollar amounts is when we were deploying this much money, there was a boutique industry of people trying to exploit some of the gaps in due diligence in some of the federal programs. And every time we post those numbers, we tend to get hit by a bunch of folks that, well, let's just say they cause irregularities in some of the systems. So we're happy to answer questions if you have about specific dollar amounts, but there's a reason why we generally don't put those front and center in some of the public documents. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. What this program does is it's to sort of piggyback a little bit on what Meg was saying. Over the years, we've heard from folks that if you want to help folks, you need to do a couple of things. You need to give them resources to help them quickly, because you might only have a couple of conversations to actually get them in, especially when we talk about trafficking victims. So have a place for them to go, funds to help rebuild their life, clothes, like Crockpot, like Meg said. You can't just put someone in an empty unit and expect them to thrive. So we set aside money for what we called short-term stabilization services. And then we had money set aside for move-in deposits and fees like that. And then we would give them 12 months of rental assistance after that. So we set it up around specific dollar amounts that we can get into if you want, that Donald will talk about here in a second. But that's what we were offering. And the program was designed to be implemented very quickly. It could be as quick as you see a person in a tent, you're a caseworker, You can use the fact that this person is in a tent and you can visually see that this is where they're living to say, we don't need to move any farther with income qualifications. We had that flexibility with Treasury that bam, they were in the program from that point forward. So if there was a place that we could move them into, we could take them directly to a hotel and get them stabilized as that quickly. It didn't always happen that quickly, but it could function that quickly. And in terms of what the program does and who it serves, I'm going to turn it over to Donald, who's been helping take the lead on some of this in the planning department.
Next slide, please. So one of the benefits of this program is that our partners are actually entering data into our system at intake. So what you're seeing here is a chart of active clients in the program right now, broken out by their point of entry. So you can see they're sleeping in shelter, sleeping outside. We also have the victim of DV, trafficking, or a refugee. And the nice thing about it is this is consolidated across all of our partners and updating in real time. So we as an agency can track these numbers and very quickly on a day-to-day basis identify any issues, see where the program is working, see anywhere we need to pivot. And what we've seen is it's been pretty consistent across the program as far as people entering on a percent basis from either a shelter or outside. And it hasn't really had an impact on them finding housing. So our partners have been doing really well there. And then if you could, next slide, please. And this slide shows across the life of the program. Again, this data is updating in real time, so we're able to check it every day. You can see we actually have 603 households in the program right now. That consists of over 1,100 individuals and 440 kids under 18. The red shows the people who have graduated or left the program. So over the life of the program, we've actually helped over 1,600 households, totaling over 3,000 people. And it says 603 for the children under 18, but that's actually 996. And that's just since the beginning of the program. And then if we could go to the next slide, please. One of the outcomes from this program was what we call dynamic capacity modeling, which is a fancy word for a, in my opinion, rather intimidating math equation. But it essentially budgets for our grantees. So as they take individuals in and those people either use all of the resources allocated to them or not all of them, it will release the funding that wasn't used and automatically update their capacity and the number of people they can help. This takes a lot of the guesswork out of their court. So they know exactly how many people they can help based on the budget that we have allocated per individual. And one of the real big benefits is, I mentioned on the previous slide, we helped over 3,000 individuals. And because of dynamic capacity modeling, we've actually have more people in the program than initial individuals we allocated resources for. So because the budget is constantly being recycled back into the programs, we're helping far more people than our partners initially thought they'd have capacity to help. And then the screenshot on the left is actually, we are rolling this into legacy programs now and starting to use this method across our older programs in order to better track the data and encourage our grantees to, one, enter data in a timely manner because it directly impacts when and how many people they can help. And it also encourages them to use the dollars in the most effective way because any dollars used that don't go to helping someone won't be able to be used for another person.
Okay. And so if I can just chime in real quick for the benefit of anyone in this room, since our audit department tried to write Donald up for this, Timothy Shalamat, is not an actual client. This is not a real person. Did I get his name right this time?
Chalamet.
Okay. I have not seen Dune. So this information, what it does is, as a funder, one of the challenges that we have typically with our legacy programs before we had the COVID and the platform that we got, or before we developed the platforms that we have to administer the COVID programs, we would get information 90 days after the fact. This system, in order for the partners to have freed up capacity to enroll new people, they need to update their system. So we're able to see things literally in real time. And because of that, we can track when did a person fall out? Were they falling out at stabilization? If so, after how many days? The access to information that we're getting, because our partners are using this as a live system as opposed to something that they report into at the end of the quarter, has really helped us evaluate where the pain points are in the program and getting out ahead of capacity issues with partners that we've seen throughout the time. Since 2002, it's a long time. Partners don't always move at the same pace. Sometimes there's staff turnover or something happens in a community or an inventory and one slows down and we need to repivot. Because we have eyes on live data, we can get out ahead of that within a week of it happening. We get daily updates on this, and it's really been integral for us. This reallocation process, the reason why we put the math up there is that these things used to be done in reallocation decisions where there would be conversations going back and forth between partners and amendments. Now the system takes a lot of that legwork out of the process for all of us. So it's breaking down some of the things that delay service delivery or continuity for our partners by putting that into the system. And we have that now. We have the ability to continue moving that forward. So that part has been great. And we've been able to follow up with a couple of our partners about the data for the people who we said graduated the program, who have used all of their assistance and moved on. And we've been able to collect data to debunk the notion that if you give someone assistance that's homeless or off the street, that it's a forever commitment. Some people do need assistance, and we're not saying that's a bad thing. That's what these programs are here for. But we have a lot of data to show that the people who were literally on the street or in a shelter have transitioned to self-sufficiency in a number of cases. It's not all cases, but they are there. So if we could move on to the next and final slide, please. So this program itself, it is going to expire on September 30th of 2025. That's the date that Treasury says all the funds have to be expended. So the big hundreds of millions of dollars that came into the state eventually get spent or go back to DC on that date. So we do still have the program operational with our partners. We're constantly evaluating their capacity to make sure that the resources are allocated to the folks that can continue moving. But the enrollment of the process will slow down because the people that will be eligible for a full 15 months, the latest they can be enrolled is in June. So after that, it becomes 14 months and then 13 and so on. So like I said, we've had a lot of households that did exit the program. A number of them have made the transition to self-sufficiency. Our public housing division, which Donald and I do not work for, set aside 400 vouchers for the people that were exiting this program that might need continued assistance in an area that our public housing division services. And we're looking at ways that we can leverage what we've learned from this throughout the program. And Mr. Constant, since you said this is a Good News Friday, I'll just point out that this process has been recognized nationally a couple of different times by our state peers across the country as a best practice. So it has got national attention. In terms of human stories, the very first person that was served by this program was a family in Fairbanks. It was in the middle of February and they were sleeping in a truck because they didn't want to go into a shelter where they would be separated. There was another person in Kodiak who was too proud to go to the shelter and had been sleeping in his truck. And the one thing that I'll point out is we also had another person who tried to be a first person in a community who was a trafficker who was trying to infiltrate one of our sponsors' facilities. So there's been a lot of good, but there's been a lot that we've had to guard against behind the scenes to make sure that the irregularities don't poison this program and distort the good stories, because there have been folks that we did have to try and actively manage to exploit some of these things. So that's just one cautionary note I'd throw out. It's been a really big part of it, but we've tried to manage it to make sure that we can just focus on successes.
Awesome.
And that's it for us.
Thank you very much. Finally, we're going to hear from Julie Graham, who is kind of leading the charge on an innovative proposal by a local church in the North District of Anchorage. It's called In Our Backyard. And so I know that there's been some interest by the organization to get before the assembly and tackle some of the questions about permitting and other issues that might exist. But today is not about the granular. It's more about the idea of what's happening. So, Julie, you have the floor.
Yes, thanks. I have a little bit of a speech disorder. I think you'll be able to understand me. So I'm a member of Central Lutheran Church on their local organizing ministry team, which is part of AFACT, when the Sullivan Central Lutheran is right above Sullivan right now on 15th and Cordova. So when the Sullivan closed the last time it closed, we met with our West Fairview neighbors because there's a lot of concern about homelessness and what was going to happen. So we met with probably about 30 or so people from the community. And one of the ideas that came up was why doesn't the church house people in our building? And we took that idea, and it's not feasible the way our building's set up and lots of other issues. So we, at the local organizing ministry, said, well, what if we house people on our property? What would that look like? What could happen with that? So from that initial meeting, we formed our own nonprofits that were separate from the church. It's in our backyard, and we're focusing on interim supportive housing with connections to support services. And we're focusing on senior homeless, houseless neighbors as they work towards a more permanent home. And you go to the next slide. So we looked at a couple of different ideas for this. We looked at pallet shelters. You can go on to the next slide. Whoops. I guess that was all together. But so our target population is elders, like I said, seniors. When we looked at the data from ACH, that made up about 27.1% of homeless people in our area. We also worked with Lutheran Social Services, and they identified this age group as a big need. So the people we are looking at to be the occupants for this program would be able to live independently, no alcohol or marijuana use on site or substance abuse issues, no sex offender registry. We'll also be looking at collecting a monthly occupancy fee that would be held in savings and then return to people when they are moving on to permanent housing. You can go to the next slide. Not that one, maybe the next one. Oh, that's okay. So one option was the pallet shelters, which I think some of you know, it's about $17,000 for 70 square feet. We talked to people in Burlington that have pallet shelters are kind of ask about the winter and the weather and the good and the bad with that. So that's one option our board is considering. You can go to the next one. The next option is a SIP construction. We're working with Envision Architect to look at those plans, and they're working with to develop a site plan. We don't have the exact cost amount for this, but it's about $6,000 for each unit. So that gives you a little idea of what that looks like. Each unit would have 2 beds in it. So we can go to the next slide. And then the option for restroom, bathroom facilities. This is a 4-season Arctic trailer. It has bathroom showers. It does not have laundry. So for laundry, we are looking at, there's a couple laundry mats near Central. So we're looking at giving vouchers or gift cards for that. And then hiring or contracting with a local laundry service to do sheets and towels and that kind of thing. So this is an option that we're looking at a lot more of. Once we had an architect, with our architect this morning. So this looks like the more feasible option. We can go to the next slide. The other option was a comfort station, which would involve maybe a septic tank, bigger construction site. And I don't know if it fits with a transitional housing. It wouldn't be easy to pick up and move. Whereas a trailer, obviously we can move it. So that's what we've been looking at. I can go on to the next slide. This is, there's Central Lutheran Church. There's the water line, electricity, septic line, I think is in the green. We're looking at that white areas where it will put our 5 tiny houses in our shower trailer. It'll be fenced. Privacy fencing on a couple of the sides. The main reason for the fencing is to protect the people who are inside from dangerous people who are predators of people who are vulnerable. We've looked into security cameras on the outside for this, so that's kind of the area that we're looking at. You can go to the next slide. How we're going to do all this is with a great deal of faith. We're a nonprofit. We've worked with or spoken with over 32 different individuals and groups. I didn't put them all up there. We've got support from our church council, our church members to have this on Central Lutheran's property. We're working with the Coalition, Catholic Social Services, Lutheran Social Services to help screen people, provide case managers. We've talked with Beans about providing meals. We've reached out to different faith groups, like people here from St. John's, if you want to wave, Central, First Covenant. We've talked with Shiloh Baptist Church. We've talked with Midtown Community Council, Fairview Community Council, getting on the list for other community councils. We want this to be a pilot project that other church or faith-based groups could pick up and emulate. We are ready and willing to go through all the problems that come up that we haven't even thought about. We have a great support network in the community. We see this as, we know housing is a goal, but I've also been at Davis Park a lot, helping with people out at Cuddy Park. Sometimes you're sleeping in your car or in a camp because you can't get to that permanent housing yet, or you're sleeping in the church doorway. And so this is a safe place for people to take a breath, get some support. They don't have to worry about their tent catching on fire or someone stealing their stuff. And we can get them the support services they need to move them on. And the other part of this is that kind of unseen, and there's no data to really collect about people who are housed, helping those who are unhoused, and making those connections and helping. We have church groups who want to take people out for coffee, take them to doctor's appointments, sponsor meals in the church's common area. So it's that kind of surround support. I know it's small, only 5, and we can have up to 10 people, but small is a way for us to make it successful and manage. And one little story is when I was helping at Davis Park and, handing out coffee, I was talking with another outreach worker, and he said, "Oh, you're from Central Lutheran?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Central Lutheran saved my life." And I looked at him and said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "They let me sleep in the doorway." And I said, "Well, we should have done more." And he said, "No, you don't get it. They let me sleep there. They didn't bother me. And now this man has a job. He has a place to live. And whenever I see him, I just get choked up because he's a success story just because someone reached out. And we want to do more than just have him sleep in our doorway." So that's who we are. I think that's, I don't know, are there more slides? There might be. Why Central, besides all those other reasons? We're really close to bus stops, close to the senior center, the navigation center, medical offices. And like I said, we already have we work with the Family Emergency Cold Weather Shelter. We have a Helping Hands Closet. We have a foot and wound clinic that nurses from UAA run with registered nurses. We have the listening post. We help with clutter. So it's just a outreach of Central's mission, but we are separate, nonprofit from that. I don't know if there's more. Yeah, there might be. Our timeline keeps getting revised. We're hoping by October 1st, we will be welcoming our occupants. And one more slide. Oh, this is about volunteers that we're sending out to church ways. People and get involved other than money, but money is a big thing right now. And I think the last one was just our information about how to get a hold of us and answer your questions. So thanks.
All right, thank you very much. So that's everybody's presentation. I'm not sure how to tackle having a roundtable conversation with so much information that came at us. And so, but as Evergreen, Ms. Brawley has a question.
Thank you. First, I want to say that we hear the narrative a lot, that we are, quote, spending millions on homelessness with nothing to show for it. So I think these stories, I really appreciate you sharing them, really show that that is an uninformed opinion, and also that it's a false statement. So thank you so much for demonstrating all of the outcomes, and especially to AHFC, well, really to all of you, but I know AHFC, that program was quietly operating, and I think no one was aware of it. So I'm glad that it was brought to light here, and how many people it's already been serving. So it seems to me that our biggest problem is really lack of public awareness and understanding of the ecosystem that already exists. Not to say that we can't do more. So I appreciate folks like in our backyard really bringing more to the table, and to, again, all of your organization's work. Then I'll come back to, I have 3 questions. One is for United Way, and really anybody who can answer it. What is the trend that we're seeing in Anchorage on evictions? Are they going up or down? That's question 1. Question 2 is again to the coalition, but really anybody who would want to answer. What do landlords typically need or want to participate in these programs? You know, what is the biggest concern, and how do we meet those concerns? You know, because I know there's risk involved. And then the third one is in our backyard, folks. I'm curious about what material you're proposing for the fencing. And the reason I ask that is because I keep thinking about the phrase, you know, picket fences, or, you know, good fences make good neighbors, right? And there's a material difference, I think, visually for, say, a wooden fence that looks like a neighborhood fence or someone's house fence versus you know, metal fencing, or I'm blanking on the word, chain link fencing. Yeah, thank you. And I think those say to somebody looking at them 2 different types of facilities. So I wonder if you, so I know that was a lot of questions, but just putting them out there. Thank you.
Hi. The eviction trend, I don't know off the top of my head, because we do not, the court system is the one that takes all of the requests for mediation. So I can get back to you, checking in with their representative. The requests that have come in for past due rental assistance specifically have gone up over the last 3 or 4 months.
So we keep track of evictions. Jessica has a report. She'd be happy to forward it. It's very steady pace. What's needed by landlords, we're finding 2 things really rise to the top. One is knowing there are supports for the people who are being housed. And the other is the risk pool mitigation. That's where we partner with the Landlord Housing Partnership. That really comes all the way, even before the Landlord Housing Partnership, all the way back when Cook Inlet did their original Pay for Success? Path to Independence. So many names for these programs. Path to Independence, risk pool came out of that, and that has been something that's really stayed, and it's really important to landlords.
So just real quick on the trends on evictions, I know that's tracked internally, and I haven't really seen a big movement on that one way or the other. I'd say since the pandemic, a lot of folks moved over to month leases. So it's become, I don't want to say a moot point, but folks can lose their housing because their lease isn't renewed, or their lease goes up by, say, $500 a month, and there's no way they can pay it. So I don't know if there's been a comprehensive study. If there is, Meg would probably know what that is, but the structure of leases and all that stuff has fundamentally changed since the pandemic happened. And I think that's affecting the data. On the landlord participation, when we started up the stabilization program, what we would hear from landlords, and we just said, hey, this is a safe space. Tell us really what you think. We found that it was heavily relationship based in terms of people that they trusted, as opposed to a process that we could put up on a PowerPoint. So if they'd been burned by someone, they were willing to give AHFC a chance if they knew that they could call us. So getting people to say, you can call us, we'll make you whole if something happens. And putting our corporate brand behind the program helped us break down some of the barriers from folks that maybe didn't have a good experience and open up their units to people in our program. So it really seemed to be very relationship centric.
With the fencing, I mean, ideally, we wouldn't have to have fencing and we could do like landscaping, but because of the concern about other people harming occupants, so we haven't purchased anything. We are looking at, we want it to look attractive, but be safe. We will be having security cameras on the outside looking. We have plans to do raised garden beds in that area. I mean, I'm picturing flowers and hanging baskets and something that looks attractive and nice, but we're definitely want it to look welcoming. So that's something we'll be thinking about too. So thank you. Yeah.
Ms. Bronga.
It's really exciting to hear what's been going on quietly behind the scenes that I didn't know about. AHFC is one example, and excited about the energy that Julie's group is putting into this project, and hoping that that can be a model for other people, because even though an actual apartment housing is the answer, there are steps along the way, and there are people who are not ready for that big of a step, I believe. But one question I had, we have on the east side some pervasive, they just love to live in the park. And we had Kathleen McLaughlin go and visit one gentleman that's in Centennial Park, and he has vouchers, and he just does not want to come out of the woods. And I wonder if any of you have suggestions of how we outreach someone like that, you know, we can get you housed and you can't live here. You know, it's tough, I know, because mental health issues are part of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so you've hit it on the head. As we house more and more people, we're going to find about 5 to 10% who have a client choice, right? And they are making choices. So, right, we've identified one person in that very small percentage of people. I think it's really important to have the conversation, though. We continue to outreach this particular individual, encourage, talk about how housing's a platform to meet other needs. And I think it's really important that we frame this conversation as this person has been offered housing versus shelter. Because what we find generally is when we are out in the community and we offer people housing, they say yes, it's not a rejection, versus shelter. People can't go to shelter for a number of reasons. So it's an important nuance and distinction, but it is a small percentage, and we know it's there.
Anyone else? Oh, go ahead.
Say from a sort of statewide funder perspective, the challenge on that, when we started up the program, the reason why we started with the 26 sponsors that we did was that's who was willing to step forward. And we just said, tell us who you're willing to help. One of the challenges we have is that we can't create organizations that don't exist. So if there's an organization that is willing to go into the camps to form those relationships, we're happy to supercharge those with money. But we can only fund what's actually out there in terms of the community. So finding the capacity to actually go out there, that can be a limiting factor in a lot of communities. Finding a community that has capacity, but it's only for DV, and making sure that it has a whole spectrum has been a challenge statewide. Just in terms of the numbers, we have, if you look at the State Department of Labor's population statistics, we have like 350 communities that they report population on. If you add up the 3,000 some odd people that we've helped that have been successfully transitioned out of homelessness with this program, they'd be bigger than 314 of those communities. So we've helped a lot of people. I don't know what the replacement rate is for people coming in, but there have been a lot of people helped, but the issues driving the problem, that's something that it's a bit of a challenge. And I don't know how broadly that is appreciated. There have been a lot of people helped, but the issue keeps growing.
Mr. Littlefield.
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question for Alaska Housing, but I want to thank all 4 of you groups. You're doing some wonderful things to end this. or at least get it toward the right direction. Alaska Housing, I just got a question. Is there a waiting list for this? Number one, I got a couple questions. And I noticed it's across the state. Where are we at in numbers for Anchorage? And the most important question, well, there's two of them. Are we looking for other means to continue this program, other funding sources? And what happens at the end of 15 months to an individual?
Okay, so a few questions there. In terms of no, that's why we're here. In terms of Anchorage, I believe, Donald, we have 250 some odd folks enrolled in the program right now. So we have, I believe, 4 or 5 active partners in Anchorage, and there is capacity to continue enrolling with those partners. And as we're looking towards the end of the program, we're trying to make sure that we don't shut off one part of the state, that we're all kind of marching at the same pace. So we don't say, all right, Anchorage, you get to continue going, Sitka, you're out of luck. So we're trying as a statewide agency to maintain that balance in the resources with the partners. But we're getting to the point where we can see the end of the program in sight in terms of the allocations. And we want to make sure that the program has a good wind down process that doesn't leave people exiting the program in the coldest months of the year. In terms of the transition, sir, it's we knew we could help people, and we knew we could get them off the street for 15 months. So we were willing to do that and say, we're not going to sit on this money and do nothing. We're going to do what we can. We told folks at the beginning when they were enrolling individuals that this was not a permanent supportive housing program that had a tail past 2025. And we asked them to really be cognizant of that when they were enrolling people, because if they were enrolling someone that was going to need continued support past 2025, this program would not be able to make that promise. So we worked with our public housing division, and they were able to carve out 400 vouchers for people transitioning out of this process. However, when they go from this process to a traditional federal program, like the kind that Meg has to deal with, and it's a good problem to have, to deal with money and strings that come with it, but there are data entry requirements, there are compliance requirements, there are eligibility criteria that may take someone who was brought off the street through this program. They may not necessarily be a good fit, or they may be precluded from another federal program. So the folks that we've helped that have converted, I would say it's about 50% based on our sample that we just did of the folks that have graduated from the program. Over 50% of them were able to make the successful transition to independent housing, or they were able to find another resource. We're still going through that data, and that was based on a sample, but we have enough people that have exited the program that we're starting to look at that. With respect to the other resources that are out there, in the department that I manage at HFC that Donald works with me on, we have 21 programs in our department alone. And then our public housing division has a number of programs and set-asides that people like Sam and Meg get to try and navigate. And it's a lot. They all have different waiting lists. They all have different criteria. So there's a process that's out there. It's just that process gets into the legacy systems that don't have the flexibility that we did with the 20-page document that Treasury said, here you go, $300 million, get it out the door. You have 20 pages of guidance versus 200 pages for $5 million. So we had a once in a lifetime flexibility with this program that's going away, and we're going back into the legacy systems for a lot of those folks. And I don't know if I wrote them down. Did that get all of your questions? Is there something I didn't answer?
You just had one at the beginning. You probably wasn't fast enough. Is there a waiting list for this?
Oh, a waiting list. No, our sponsors still have capacity to enroll people. So if there's a community where we have an active partner in, we try and make sure that there is no community in Alaska that is going to say no to people coming into this program. The challenge is, do we have a partner that's willing to go into that space? Like if we have a partner who's operating in DV, they have the ability to bring someone in out of a tent if it's a family, but they need to partner with someone. So there is capacity. It's just a match on making sure that the partner has that as part of their coverage area or is willing to partner with someone who can help them.
So, there are a lot of elements to the conversation of what happens next to all of these issues when federal funding disappears. And you haven't been briefed mostly on the work that Ms. Altel, Ms. Brawley, and I have done with Senator Solomon in DC, but we are working hard to get HUD to look really closely at how Alaska is funded, because there's an inherent inequity a vast inequity on the funding that comes under the HUD formulas for a number of reasons, population versus other communities' populations, and the nature of the formula when it was founded pre-World War II, post-Depression. It weights communities that are in the East, and it's just a mess. And so we have an active effort to figure out what's happening more broadly, kind of in that 24-month time frame. It's not something the federal government moves slow. Government moves slow. The federal government moves really slow, but it is an ongoing concern that we have as a close focus. So any other questions? Go ahead, Karen.
I guess it was more of a comment. I find it really frustrating that my backyard has got this idea and we see this a lot with planning and, you know, the inspection of this plan and how this is getting dragged out. And I guess when I see this group putting so much energy into it, and there's other groups out there that have great ideas and they just kind of get on the back burner. And I'm just hoping that as a body, we can continue to do everything we can to move things like this forward. While they have the momentum, their experience could quickly go bad if they wait another year to get those plans approved that they can move forward. So just like to do everything we can to really encourage groups like this.
I don't know if you spoke about the barriers that you're experiencing, but sure, now might be the time. But it is good news, but maybe the answer to the solution is that. But I will say just a philosophical approach to this. I hear stories in other jurisdictions, like in Florida and Texas, where a government attempts to censure, stop, or criminally charge somebody for feeding an individual or a group of individuals who are homeless, or providing water to people who are on the southern border in the desert and that are likely to die. And the common theme that comes out of those cases is that these are churches that are organizing, and the churches have a shield from the government when they're doing certain actions, and they might have to put up with the headache of going through that criminal charging process when a law is plainly unconstitutional. But the point I'm making is that churches can push in a way that's different than any other organization. And even through acts of civil disobedience, like just doing the thing, which is criminal, feeding people, clothing people, providing water to people, I think housing falls within that rubric. And so I have often thought that one of the answers is when a group of churches just gets together and says, enough is enough, we're going to do this thing, then it happens. And so, and then that sets the trend for others that might want to get involved with the work. And so that's just a philosophical approach that I've mentally embraced. So here we have a church that is leading the edge, I think, in our town. And so that's the good news to me, is you're doing it. So then I don't know that it's bad news to say what the barriers are, because the question is, how can members help resolve the barriers? That's the good news. So now you have the floor. Sorry.
That's okay. I think you gave us permission to just go for it.
I don't have that power, but yeah, I don't have that power, but I will tell you there is a long history in this country.
Yes.
There's a long history in this country.
So really, the big barrier was looking at the municipal code. And I know that Randy and others put out shelter units for shelter camps. And I have that code that's being looked at. And like Ms. Brown says, in that cycle, it feels like to me, I mean, I'm new with all this, that it goes somewhere in the planning, zoning, legal, and it's kind of going like this. And we just need, well, maybe we don't need to just go for it, because we're looking at these units that can be picked up and moved. We have all this stuff here. We have, So it was the land, it's the permit, the building code. So if that Randy put forth gets, passed and approved, then it looks great. But maybe we should do it, say we're affiliated with religious groups, and so we have that power to just, it's on our private property. We have permission from the property. I mean, like I said, I'm new at this. I've never started a nonprofit before. I just Googled it and thought if this is what we need to do. So the building code and right now fundraising, but we have lots of grants out there. We have the word out. We're writing lots of grants. One thing I'm learning about, I'm not a grant writer either, but one thing I'm learning is sometimes big foundations want you to have some money set aside already that you can show buy-in. So we're going out and almost knocking on doors and saying, can you give us $5, $10? I mean, I feel that we can get this money and get this going. So our barriers would be that we were stuck with this building code stuff. We've also put together an operating budget that someone from the health department had reached out to me looking at accessing those 500,000, I believe it was $500,000 for operating a pilot transitional housing unit. So we have that out there. I know then we have to have the RFP before we can officially apply. But if you'd just like to give us the money, that's fine too. So those are barriers. We don't have barriers with people help, volunteer, faith, the nonprofit groups I've met with, offering to help us in any way they can. So those aren't barriers.
So, and I'll just return to my previous statement and say I wasn't giving anyone legal advice. I'm not an attorney, so I don't have that power. So, Meg.
Thanks. So the In Our Backyard proposal also proposes to use SIPS panels. And I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're basically prefab construction that are really well suited to cold climates. They're a lot like Legos, but you glue them with super glue. They're really easy to put together. They take a pretty unskilled workforce. Currently, they are not approved under Anchorage building codes. They did actually just pass kind of a university seismic test yesterday that's going to be used by Anchorage to consider them for use in building in Anchorage. But that's another regulatory barrier. And the reason I know that is the coalition's working on notice of funding opportunity for housing and wanting to work with rural partners. And we're trying to figure out a housing device that can be both here and extrapolated to rural. And SIPs is the thing. They're manufactured here locally, but the building code is a barrier to deploying them in Anchorage. So something, if you all want to look into, I think is a good place to start. Cold Climate Research Institute has a lot of information about them as well. Because one of the key things about building transitional housing or housing for people experiencing homelessness is you don't want your utilities to bankrupt your operation. And you want light, quick, cheap housing, quality housing, but light, quick, cheap, so that cost per unit doesn't also bankrupt your program. Thanks.
Claire.
Hello, I'm Claire, Legislative Services Director for the Assembly, and I helped organize this. So thank you so much for coming. I heard each of you talk about your programs in different areas, and I wanted to bring you all together so that it could be a joint look at all of your projects. So I have a couple questions. Number one is a technical question for ACH and AHFC. How do your databases talk to each other? Like, how does HIMS talk to the program that you're talking about?
They don't, but we're friendly with one another. So our HMIS data drives public dashboards that AHFC, of course, always has access to. And then we are currently pending for some ERA2 funding from the municipality to do the next step with families. So we're going to get into that awesome platform if that is granted. And so we'll have access to that.
Yeah, so when we started the program, that was one of the first issues that we were trying to address was, what were we going to do to handle the data? And some of our partners use HMIS, others didn't. And folks are welcome to enter in information into HMIS, and I think some of our partners do with this data, but we didn't want to have that be a barrier if someone wasn't willing to help a person. We didn't want to have we were looking at all potential things that a person could use to say no to get someone off the street and say, with this resource, are you willing to help that person? And can we make sure that everyone who can get helped is helped? So there was a bit of a tension in that discussion because I know that's a data quality issue and it would really help. It was a trade-off. And so that's the honest answer to it.
And then I had one more question for all of you. I've seen the assembly has received a couple emails this week of why is the problem getting worse and worse? And clearly it's not. You're addressing it, but can you explain why it seems to people that the problem's been getting worse over the years?
Yeah. So, and that's the tough thing, right? Our data tells us otherwise, but data isn't what you see with the story on the street. So, one thing is one important factor, actually two important factors. COVID really brought people forward who were living in a kind of informal resolution. So whether they were couch surfing or something, when everyone told they had to get away from each other, those informal safety nets fell apart. And so we saw more people enter unsheltered homelessness. The good news to that is when mass care was stood up, we were able to get more of an accurate count of people experiencing homelessness. Two is as we've had outreach services, people have come more to where they can actually access services. And so they are more visible. And actually, there's a third piece there. We've just seen housing prices soar. So last winter, the number one driver of family homelessness, the inflow, was increased rents. And so we are seeing folks we don't want to see on the streets because the inflow will exceed the capacity of the safety nets because they didn't expand with the cost of housing. They didn't expand with the loss of those informal safety nets. And so we're making progress with those who are experiencing literal homelessness, but that number definitely shot up. If you look at the trend of time, you see COVID, you see the number go up, and now you're starting to see it come back down.
I'd say this is one it gets a bit into the policy versus the program effectiveness issue. And I would say that as a housing agency providing these services, I try and see our role as almost like a healthcare provider in an emergency room, making sure that the people who need help can get it. In that same vein, I'm not really sure the emergency room people are the best person to speak on why people keep coming to the emergency room. We have insights, but there are a lot of things going on in terms of affordability, rents, accesses to issues, and it's really big. The ability of the programs to respond and make sure that no one is left out in the cold. I think that's how we try and see our role as limited to make sure that we're able to help as many people as need help. There are a lot of things moving the markets, and that's its own issue. So I'm just a little hesitant to venture in because that kind of gets outside of my role at the corporation. But I understand the question.
Anyone else? All right. You have the floor, Meg.
Great. Oh, did she leave? Is she there?
No.
Oh, okay, great. So when we got invited, we actually, we say it's really important to have people with lived experience and expertise be a part of this conversation. And there's a familiar face to you all who has been through the Next Step program. So we'd like to invite Bree Witzke up. She has graciously agreed to join us to share her experience with the Next Step with you all. Bree, would you come up and sit with us, please? We've really appreciated, I know she had a long conversation with Jessica. It's makes our program better when people who go with it will share their experience with us. So Bree, would you like to share a little bit about your experience with the Next Step? You'll have to press the mic till it's green and then you can let go.
I don't mind sharing that, but before we get too far, I wanted to bring in the other thing to support what you're saying as far as our homeless and whatnot that was not originally homeless. The other thing, not only has the surge of pricing of housing gone up, also the application process going from 25 to as far as 45 and 65 for these people to be able to move into a more affordable homing. Now, originally, from what I understood, as far as our real estate market went, it was 25 for any adult. Now they're looking at 25 to 65 for even a child. All these background things, and those costs add up moving into a new, more affordable situation to make it all of a sudden unaffordable. When many of these places are advertising availabilities, and they're not really any availabilities. How much of this money is actually going into these property managers and these property management situations where it's actually not doing any good for not only the people that are trying to move, but also the situation or the ones that are actually trying to move people into their places. So that is something I do want to make sure that is kind of brought out the limelight, that we are seeing that. I've seen that. I've heard about it. I've talked with people that have had issues with that. I don't know what can be done about it, but it is a real thing. As far as the Next Step program, I am a member that has recently just got into housing. I was originally part of Alaska Housing as far as it goes. My situation there was not the boast. I tried to make decisions that was going to leave more, as a survivor of homelessness, available to the grant for Alaska Housing. I appreciate what was there. It had given me at least a place to be able to keep majority of my stuff safe, even though my dog did not get along with the people I chose to move in with. And it's of no fault to you guys, but it did land me back in the same situation. And with the Next Step program, these gracious people went out of their way to find a place to house me and my animal is the only thing I've got. And I'm happy to be in a home, and I'm still struggling to try to set everything up and work as much as I am, but I'm blessed to have a home. And there's many stages to homelessness that we have to keep in our forefront. The final goal is to get somebody in a home. But when it comes to that, there's a whole list of sides that we need to continue to sometimes bring to that limelight, bring to the table. It's not a matter of just putting them in a building. Some people need more help than others. Thankfully, I've been around this for 30 years. I've lived majority of the time in a home. I wasn't too far out of the habits of everyday life. Everyday life for some of these people quickly disappears when you're on the streets. So finding the support, not only getting into a housing, as you spoke of earlier, as far as groups to go out there with camps to find the ones that are in good positions. But once we get them in a home, to finding ways to continue to support them as they're in their home. Many of them don't remember what it is to do dishes, how to clean, when it's, how to set up a program of just doing laundry, how to make sure that they don't feel like they have to invite all their friends because they finally got to step in. That's going to cause issues with landlords, cause issues with their homing situation. There's many factors to it, and support all the way around. The next part about it is sometimes whenever we get a home to these people, it can change their daily drug use if that's an issue. But we have to maintain hands-on, and something like this is a start. It's a great start. So I do encourage growth in this, and to be able to continue to help those that are struggling with addiction find solutions to get away from it, and to do so with help, not necessarily just their own community, but the community members that are trying to help. So again, in all factors, guys, I really appreciate what I've seen here, the conversation I've heard just walking in. And I hope and pray every day that we're able to find what works for our community. It may not be what is the same for the lower 48. So I encourage everybody to continue to strive, and don't get frustrated when we find a road barrier one way or the other, because I'm telling you, I'm 44 years old. I'm in a home. I cannot argue with that. And I appreciate that, many have had their hands in making that available. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate you being here and sharing your story. I guess my question is, since you have the microphone, I know you come to our meetings often and you speak your mind. Do you have advice either for, I guess, your peers who are still experiencing homelessness, and do you have advice for the community at large?
For my peers that are still struggling with homelessness, I always encourage that they don't give up on themselves. Don't get lost to everybody else's issues. Try to hone in on what you need, make it be known, and set yourself up for the best experiences of success possible. For the community at large, be patient. Like I said, when you hit homelessness, the things that many of us in a home have that we take for granted become half a day chores to make happen. When we are in a home on a regular basis, we don't think of how convenient it is to turn on that tap and get you a glass of water to go cook it. So when we're homeless, we don't have that. To get back into a situation where you do is not your first thought anymore. So with the community, stay patient with them. Some are going to succeed the first time around. Some may not succeed till the ninth time around. Finding the best situation or having as available options as possible as far as screening and re-educating and helping get back into those proper habits is, in my opinion, going to be the key to success. But staying patient. Nothing like this is going to walk itself back quickly. Just like government doesn't move quick.
All right, thank you. So I think that's a good spot to end, and that this is our food for thought series, and I'd like to call it What's Good, Anchorage. Despite all of the stories we hear, there's a lot of good, and thank you for all of you coming to be part of this conversation. We're going to adjourn. Thank you. We'll be back on the record at 1:00.